Now it's time for this hour's news review. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has warned Russia against acting, quote, aggressively towards Ukraine. In an interview, Blinken expressed concern about what he called Russia's action on the border with Ukraine. The top U.S. diplomat said Russia will face consequences and costs if it acts recklessly. Russia has said it is not moving towards war with Ukraine, but will defend its citizens in the eastern parts of the country. Those areas have recently witnessed fierce fighting between Ukraine's army and Russia-backed pro-independence fighters. Kiev has accused Moscow of amassing troops near its borders. Russia says its military movements are for self-protection against a NATO buildup. I'd like to welcome both my guests to this news review. Lawrence Davidson, former lecturer at Westchester University out of Westchester, and John Stepling, author and commentator out of Norway. Thank you both for being with us. Starting it off with Lawrence, what is going on? You heard what I was saying. Basically, on the one hand, we have two different sides, the way that they're talking about what is going on. Your take on what is exactly happening?
Well, President Biden has to talk with or thinks. By the way, you're echoing back to me, so I'm trying to ignore it. Okay, so.
Okay, I tell you what, Lawrence, let me switch over to John, and hopefully we can fix that in the interim. John, take it away. Your perspective of what is going on. We have obviously opposite perspectives coming out of Russia and Moscow.
Well, you know, Biden has appointed a very hawkish a cabinet, and all his appointments are what Sarah Flounders called think tank war hawks, and foremost among them is Anthony Blinken, and he's a long-time career State Department guy, diplomat. And Victoria Nuland is another one. Jake Sullivan. These are very extreme interventionists. Victoria Nuland has direct experience in Ukraine. She was with Hillary Clinton, one of the architects of the coup in Ukraine that brought fascists into power. Biden was part of that as well, of course. Blinken has always been very hardline on Syria. He thought the U.S. didn't use nearly enough force against Assad. He was perfectly fine with the intervention in Libya. So now he is in a position of some prominence and power. And what you saw with Trump and Mike Pompeo was they didn't like NATO. They tried to bully NATO. The U.S. is now re-engaged with NATO. Blinken's a big NATO guy. Biden's a big NATO guy. They've been talking with Jens Stoltenberg and trying to kind of mend fences and get all their ducks in a row there, and everybody on the same page propaganda-wise. Russia hasn't done anything here that warrants all this excitement. I mean, they move some troops around. The United States does that every week all over the world. Remember, the U.S. has 900 bases outside of its borders. Russia has, I think, 3, and they're all in former Soviet republics. So this is theater. This is public performance. It's the beginning of the Biden era, and they're laying groundwork. What's interesting, though, is if you read the Western press, the anti-Russia rhetoric is extraordinary. I mean, Putin is regularly referred to as a thug and a gangster, and so the American public is constantly being bombarded with anti-Chinese, especially anti-Russian and anti-Iranian rhetoric and propaganda. So that's really all this is. I mean, the United States is not going to intervene anytime soon, I don't think. Nothing's happening of any magnitude.
Okay. Lawrence, hopefully you've rejoined us, and I hope that the connection is somewhat better. Your take, where do you see this going? I mean, John has just said that he doesn't think that the U.S. really wants to intervene there. But then what is exactly going on, and why have they been making so much noise about what is happening there in Ukraine on the border?
Well, I think he's right that the United States is not going to, overly intervene, though they will up the armaments that they're sending into the Ukraine, particularly anti-tank weapons and that sort of thing. I think Biden feels particularly angry, I guess, at the Russians because of their relationship with Trump. So Trump was very, very, easygoing with the Russians, and they intervened allegedly in our elections. Biden feels that he has to be very tough and very forward in this. On the other hand, the Russians, I guess, feel that for centuries and centuries, the Ukraine or large parts of the Ukraine were Russia, and that the fall of the Soviet Union put the Russian Republic at a military disadvantage, and NATO was the vehicle, the vector, through which this disadvantage has been created. So I think that what the Russians are telling the Ukrainians and the Americans is like, look, I mean, we're going to establish perimeters. These perimeters will take up areas that we either think are strategically important to us, like the Crimea, or where there's a majority of Russian ethnic groups, and that's it. That's what we're reclaiming, that territory. And I think the Americans are just going to have to eat that. I mean, they're just going to have to accept it. After all, I mean, what would happen if Texas seceded? And not that that would be such a terrible thing, but what would happen if Texas seceded and all of a sudden you've got Russian military assistance going into Texas? The United States government would go nuts over this. So, and that's sort of a comparison of how the Russians saw the loss of the Ukraine,
Okay.
and the Americans giving weapons to the Ukraine. So it's a tense situation, but I don't think it's going to lead to anything overly serious.
Okay, thank you so
the United
much.
States.
Thank you so much, both of you, being with us on this news review. Lawrence Davidson, former lecturer out of Westchester University. John Stepling, author and commentator out of Inderøy, Norway.